At my husband's funeral, his phone kept ringing. When I finally answered, I understood everything. The rain didn't know when to stop. Neither did his phone. I stood at the edge of the grave, mud soaking into the hem of my black dress, and listened to the priest say words that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The casket gleamed under the gray sky, mahogany, the one Daniel always said was too expensive for someone who spent his life fixing other people's problems instead of buying nice things for himself. I bought it anyway. I bought him everything he never asked for. And now he was 6 feet underground, and his phone was ringing in my pocket. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The mourners shifted under their black umbrellas. My brother-in-law Marcus touched my elbow, his fingers cold and trembling. He whispered for me to turn it off, said it was disrespectful, said I needed to let go. I didn't move. The phone buzzed again, the 7th time in 15 minutes. I could feel the vibration against my thigh like a heartbeat, like Daniel was trying to dig his way out of the grave and call me from the other side, like death was just a bad connection and he was trying to get through. But Daniel had been dead for 48 hours. Car accident, they said, black ice on the highway, a curve he'd driven 100 times, one wrong turn of the wheel, and then nothing. Except Daniel grew up in Michigan. He could drive on ice blindfolded with one hand on the wheel and the other holding a sandwich and the third holding a coffee. Yes, he was that kind of coordinated, the kind that made the rest of us feel clumsy just by existing. I told the detective that. He nodded and written something down and given me that look, the urine denial look, the grief has made you crazy look. But I wasn't in denial. I wasn't crazy. I was waiting, because Daniel once told me something back when we were still newlyweds and he still had that quiet intensity from his years as an investigative journalist, back when we lived in a tiny apartment with cardboard boxes for furniture and more love than sense. We were lying in bed at 2 a.m. and his phone had buzzed with an encrypted message. He'd read it, gone pale, the kind of pale that comes from seeing something you wish you hadn't, and then turned to me. His eyes were different in that moment, older, heavier. He said if he ever didn't answer his phone, I should keep calling. If he ever didn't call back, I should run. I asked him what he meant. He just smiled, that smile that always meant he was protecting me from something, that smile that said, trust me even though I'm lying to you right now, and said I would know when I needed to know. I had forgotten that conversation. Buried it under years of morning coffees and evening arguments and lazy Sundays and the comfortable silence of 2 people who had stopped being 2 people and become one thing, one creature, one heartbeat. I have forgotten it until right now, standing in the rain with mud on my dress and his phone buzzing in my hand. The phone buzzed again, 8th time. The priest paused mid-sentence, his white robe soaked through, his face uncertain. He asked if I wanted to continue, if I needed a moment, if I wanted to sit down. I didn't answer him. I looked at the casket, at the rain streaming down the polished wood, at the flowers that were already wilting because nobody had remembered to put them in water before the service. I looked at the faces of people who loved my husband but didn't know him, not the way I did. Not the way that matters. His college roommate was there, crying into his sleeve. His editor was there, looking guilty. His mother was there, too old and too tired to stand in the rain, but refusing to leave. Then I pulled the phone out of my pocket. His phone, still warm from the constant buzzing, like it had been held by a living hand just moments ago. The screen glowed through the rain. Unknown caller. No name, no number, just those 2 words that felt like a threat and a promise all at once. I swiped answer. A man's voice came through. Calm, too calm, the kind of calm that belongs to people who have done terrible things and slept fine afterward, the kind of calm that comes from absolute certainty that you will never face consequences. He said, Mr. Chen, you have something that belongs to Mr. Vantage. Deliver it to the Lafayette parking garage, level B3 in 1 hour, or we delete your wife's heart from the grid." The world stopped. Not metaphorically, actually. The rain kept falling, but I couldn't feel it anymore. The mourners kept watching, but I couldn't see them. The priest kept talking, but I couldn't hear him. All I could see was the casket. All I could hear was that voice, smooth, unhurried, absolutely certain of its own power, like a man who had said these words before and would say them again. "I told him Daniel was dead." My voice sounded like it came from somewhere far away, from the bottom of a well, from the other side of a door that had just been slammed shut. There was a pause, then a soft laugh, the kind that isn't funny, just amused at your stupidity, just delighted by your pain. He said I must be the ghost in the suit, and then he said the new plan was for me to bring it, or they would send me to join my husband. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked up. Across the cemetery, past the crooked headstones and the wilting flowers and the muddy path we had all walked to get here, a black SUV sat idling near the gate. Tinted windows, engine running, no license plate. It hadn't been there when the service started. I would have noticed. I notice everything now. Grief does that, sharpens your senses until you can hear a pin drop from across the room and see a liar from across the street. I turned to Marcus. His face was pale, paler than grief, paler than the rain, paler than the flowers on the casket. His hands were shaking. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was looking at the ground, at the sky, at anything but me. I asked him what Daniel had told him. He blinked too fast, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. And finally he said that Daniel had asked him to make sure I didn't throw away his old running shoes, the red ones, from the marathon. I stared at him for a long moment, a very long moment. Long enough for the rain to soak through my dress, long enough for the priest to clear his throat twice, long enough for Marcus to start crying. Then I looked back at the SUV. It hadn't moved. It didn't need to. It was watching, waiting, patient as a spider. I didn't say goodbye to the priest. I didn't shake any hands. I didn't thank anyone for coming. I walked past the mourners, past the open grave, past the pile of wet dirt that would soon cover my husband forever, and I didn't look back. The SUV didn't follow, not yet, but it would. I could feel its eyes on my back, could feel the men inside watching me go, could feel the weight of their patience like a hand on my shoulder. I made it to my car before my legs gave out. I sat there in the driver's seat with the rain hammering the roof like God was trying to break through, like the sky itself was grieving, and I tried to remember how to breathe. The cemetery was a gray blur through the windshield. The SUV was still there, still idling, still waiting. I could see the exhaust puffing into the cold air, could see the faint glow of a cigarette inside. I emptied Daniel's bag onto the passenger seat. He had carried this bag for years, a worn leather thing he had picked up at a market in Cairo, back when he was still a freelancer, back when he still had that look of a man who had nowhere to be and everywhere to go. I had made fun of it. I had called it his Indiana Jones bag. He had told me to mind my own business. Now I held it like it was made of gold, like it was the last piece of him I would ever touch. Inside I found the usual things, a notebook filled with his messy handwriting, a handful of pens, a receipt from a gas station 2 towns over, dated the day before he died, a half-eaten granola bar, a photograph of the 2 of us at our wedding, and then, tucked into the lining like a secret he had been saving for the end, like a message in a bottle he hoped would reach me, I found 2 things. A burner phone, cheap, plastic, the kind you buy with cash at a convenience store so no one can trace it, and a key card. The key card was slick black plastic with a magnetic strip, then a hologram that caught the light even in the dimness of the car. It read, Vantage Biomedical, clearance level, Omega. Below that, in smaller letters that seemed to mock me, authorized personnel only. Violators will be prosecuted. I had never heard of Vantage Biomedical. Neither had Google, I would later learn. Neither had the FBI, it turned out. The company didn't exist on paper. It had no headquarters, no public filings, no employees you could find in a directory. It was a ghost, a shadow, a name that appeared in documents and then disappeared when you tried to follow it.
The burner phone buzzed. I nearly dropped it. The screen glowed with a single text message. No sender ID, no timestamp, just words that burned into my eyes. Check your closet, 10 p.m. tonight. Come alone. Signed with the letter D. Daniel. But Daniel was dead. I read the message 7 times. Then I started the car and drove. The SUV followed at a distance. I could see it in my rearview mirror. A black shark swimming through the rain, patient and hungry. I didn't try to lose it. Not yet. I wanted them to know I wasn't afraid. I wanted them to see me driving toward whatever was coming. Our house was a small farmhouse on a quiet road, the kind of place where neighbors waved and kids left bicycles on the lawn, and the biggest crime in 20 years was someone stealing a lawn gnome. Daniel had picked it because of the porch swing. He said he wanted to grow old there, sitting on that swing with his feet up, drinking coffee and watching the world go by. Watching our grandchildren play in the yard. He would never grow old anywhere now. He would never see grandchildren. He would never drink coffee on that porch again. I parked in the driveway. The SUV stopped at the end of the road, headlights off, waiting like a predator in the tall grass. I walked inside. The house smelled like him, leather and sandalwood, and the faint trace of the expensive cologne he only wore on anniversaries, and the sharper scent of the coffee he brewed every morning. His coat was still hanging by the door, a worn brown jacket I had been meaning to throw away for years. His mug was still in the sink, the one that said World's Okayest Journalist, a gift from me that he had pretended to hate, but used every single day. His laptop was still on the kitchen table, open to a half-written article about something I would never get to read, a story that would never be finished. I went upstairs. Our bedroom was exactly as we had left it, the bed unmade, sheets tangled in the shape of his body, his pajamas on the floor, the blue ones with the holes in the elbows, a stack of books on his nightstand, thrillers mostly, the kind he liked to read before bed while I pretended not to watch him, while I memorized the way his lips moved when he read, the way his brow furrowed at a plot twist, the way he smiled when the good guys won.
I opened the closet. His clothes hung on the left side, mine on the right. I had offered to move his over after he died. Marcus had said not to rush. Marcus didn't understand that I needed to smell his sweaters, needed to press my face into his scarves and pretend he had just stepped out for a minute, needed to believe that he would come back and put his clothes back on and walk out of this house like nothing had happened. The red running shoes were exactly where Marcus said they would be, in the back of the closet, buried under winter coats and memories, under the weight of years and the dust of neglect. Size 10, scuffed from 1,000 miles, the laces were frayed, the soles were worn thin. He had worn these shoes the day he ran his first marathon, the one he finished despite a pulled hamstring and pouring rain and a voice in his head that told him to quit. I had been at the finish line, holding a sign that said, "My husband is faster than your husband." He had laughed so hard he had nearly collapsed, and then he had collapsed anyway, and I had caught him, and we had stayed like that for a long time, him leaning on me holding him up, both of us too tired and too happy to move. I picked up the left shoe, turned it over, peeled back the insole, and felt something small and hard fall into my palm. A micro SD card, no bigger than my thumbnail. Black plastic, unmarked, unremarkable. I held it up to the light and thought about how strange it was that something so small could end a life, could bring down a company, could change the world. I thought about Daniel's hands holding this same card, his fingers pressing it into the shoe, his heart racing as he hid it there. I thought about him knowing he might die, knowing he might never come back, and still choosing to hide the evidence instead of destroying it. I looked out the window. The SUV was still there, still waiting, but now there were two men standing beside it, hunched against the rain. The first was tall, gray-haired, wearing a coat that cost more than my car. He stood with his hands in his pockets like he was waiting for a bus, like this was just another Tuesday, like he hadn't just threatened to kill me an hour ago. The second was built like a refrigerator and carried something heavy under his jacket, a gun probably, or maybe something worse. They started walking toward my front door, slow and unhurried, like they had all the time in the world, like they knew I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't run for the back. I ran for the garage. The parking lot was empty except for my car and the rain and a single flickering light above the entrance. The light buzzed and hummed, flickering on and off like a heartbeat, like a warning. I made it 20 feet before I heard the first shot. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that means a silencer, the kind of quiet that means a professional. The bullet hit the bumper of a minivan 3 feet to my left, and the sound of metal on metal echoed through the empty lot. Silenced, professional, the kind of shot meant to scare, not kill, but the next one might not be so generous. I dove behind a dumpster. The ground was wet and cold and smelled like garbage and death, but I didn't care. The gray-haired man walked toward me like he had all the time in the world. His shoes splashed through puddles. His hands were in his pockets. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like someone's grandfather, someone who would teach you how to fish, someone who would tell you stories about the war. The refrigerator followed a few steps behind, cracking his knuckles one by one, a sound like breaking bones. The gray-haired man called out over the rain. His voice was conversational, almost friendly, like we were old acquaintances catching up. He said Daniel was smart, smarter than them, honestly. He said Daniel had hidden the data somewhere they could not find, somewhere they had been looking for weeks. But me, he said, I was predictable. I was grieving, and grieving people made mistakes. He said he understood. He said he was sorry for my loss. He said it didn't have to be this way. I looked at the micro SD card in my hand. Then I looked at the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall behind the dumpster. Then I looked at the refrigerator, who was close enough now that I could smell his cheap cologne, something spicy and overwhelming that made my eyes water. I shouted back that I was not grieving. The gray-haired man raised an eyebrow, curious now, interested. I said I was angry, and angry people are a lot more dangerous than grieving ones. I said my husband taught me that.
I kicked the dumpster. It rolled forward slow at first, then faster still, momentum building with every inch, and crashed into the refrigerator, pinning him against a sedan. He went down with a sound like a bag of hammers hitting concrete, a sound that was somehow both wet and dry at the same time. The gun under his jacket skittered across the wet pavement, spinning to a stop in a puddle. The gray-haired man fired again, but I was already moving, already diving, already rolling. I grabbed the fire extinguisher, ripped it off the wall, and swung it like I was back in the batting cages with my father, like I was 12 years old again and pretending to be a baseball star. The first hit knocked the gun out of his hand. The second hit knocked him to his knees. The third hit? Well, the third hit was for Daniel. It was for every night he came home late, every secret he couldn't tell me, every time I woke up alone in an empty bed. It was for the funeral. It was for the rain. It was for the phone that wouldn't stop ringing. He looked up at me, blood running from a cut above his eye, mixing with the rain on his face. And he smiled. He smiled like this was all a game, like he had already won, like I was just too stupid to realize it. He said Daniel had died for nothing, just a journalist with a death wish. He asked how many people like my husband they had buried. He said the number would surprise me. He said I was not special, just next, just another name on a list, just another loose end to tie up. I knelt down next to him, put my face close to his. I could smell his breath, coffee and cigarettes, and something else, something metallic, something like blood. I told him no. Daniel died for the story, and I was going to finish it. I hit him one more time, just to be sure, just to feel the impact travel up my arm, just to watch his eyes roll back in his head. Then I grabbed the fallen gun, stuffed it in my waistband, and ran. I did not go home. I drove to a motel on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and beds you did not want to think too hard about, the kind where you paid by the hour and nobody asked your name. I paid cash. I did not give a name. I locked the door, shoved the dresser against it, and sat on the bed with Daniel's laptop. The micro SD card slid into the slot with a soft click, a sound that felt like a key turning in a lock. One file, a video, dated 3 days before the accident. I pressed play.
Daniel appeared on the screen. He was sitting in a hotel room I did not recognize. Beige walls, generic art, the kind of place that could be anywhere in America, anywhere in the world. His hair was a mess, unwashed and sticking up in every direction. His eyes were red, swollen from crying or lack of sleep, or both. He was wearing the gray sweater I had given him for our 10th anniversary, the one he said was too soft to wear anywhere but home, the one he only wore when he was sad or scared or both. He was holding his phone up to his face like he was trying to memorize every detail of his own reflection before it disappeared, like he was saying goodbye to himself. He said my name, Elena. His voice cracked on the word, broke like a twig underfoot. He looked down at his hands, then back up at the camera. There was a long pause, the kind where someone is trying to find the words for something too big to say, too heavy to lift, too painful to speak aloud. He said that if I was watching this, he was gone. He knew that sounded dramatic, but he had been doing this job long enough to know when he had stepped on the wrong toes. And this time, he said, he had stepped on a lot of toes. He had stepped on the toes of people who did not forgive, people who did not forget, people who had killed before and would kill again. He told me about Vantage Biomedical, a pharmaceutical company that did not exist on paper. No website, no press releases, no public-facing anything. They operated in the shadows, in the spaces between laws, in the gaps where nobody was watching. But they were about to release a drug called Vantix, supposed to treat chronic pain. Non-addictive, safe, a miracle. He said it was not a miracle. It was a death sentence. He pulled out a stack of papers, printouts, handwritten notes, spreadsheets covered in red ink. His hands were shaking as he held them up to the camera. He had been inside their clinical trial data for 6 months. 6 months of late nights and fake identities and close calls. 6 months of looking over his shoulder, of sleeping with one eye open, of jumping at every shadow. He found that they had faked every single result. The drug did not just fail to work, it killed. In the animal trials, 70% of the subjects died of cardiac arrest. In the human trials, they just made up the numbers, changed the outcomes, buried the bodies. They paid off doctors. They threatened families. They did whatever it took to keep the truth from coming out.
7 people were already dead, he said. 7. And they were planning to release Vantix in 8 weeks. 8 weeks. Millions of prescriptions, millions of deaths. He said the math was simple, and the math was terrifying, and the math kept him up at night. He looked directly into the camera, directly at me. His eyes were fierce now, burning with the fire of someone who has nothing left to lose. He said he had the proof, all of it, the original data, the emails, the internal memos, the whistleblower testimony. It was all on this card. He had hidden it in his running shoes, the red ones. He knew I would keep them. He knew I would never throw away anything that reminded me of him. He knew me better than anyone in the world, and he was counting on that. He smiled, and it was the saddest smile I had ever seen. It was the smile of a man who had already accepted his death, who had made peace with it, who was only sorry for the pain he was about to cause. He told me about a woman named Miriam Soto, a data analyst at Vantage who had given him the files, who had risked everything to do the right thing. She would meet me at the Owl Diner on Maple Street at 10 p.m. I was to tell her the marathon never ended. He said she would know what it meant. He looked down at his hands again. When he looked back up, he was crying. Not the quiet tears of a man trying to be brave, but the open sobs of someone who has lost control, who has given up pretending. He said he was sorry he did not tell me. He was sorry he made me fall in love with someone who could not promise me a long life, someone who would leave me alone in a cemetery in the rain. But he needed me to know something he should have said every day, instead of just thinking it.
The last 12 years, he said, they were the story. Everything else was just noise. I was never a footnote. I was the headline. I was the lead. I was the reason he wrote, the reason he fought, the reason he got out of bed every morning. He opened his mouth to say something else, changed his mind, then closed his eyes and took a deep breath, and said the only thing he had ever said that I did not believe. He told me not to come looking for him. He told me to stay safe. He told me to live. The video cut to black. I sat there in the dark of that cheap motel room, the rain still falling outside, the neon light flickering through the blinds, and I did not cry. Crying was for later. Crying was for after. Right now, I had a job to do. Right now, I had a promise to keep. The knock came at 9:47. I looked through the peephole. Marcus, alone, shivering in the rain, his coat soaked through, his hair plastered to his forehead. I opened the door. He shoved a manila envelope into my chest. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold it, could barely stand. His eyes were wide, the kind of wide that comes from seeing something you cannot unsee, the kind of wide that comes from staring into the abyss and having the abyss stare back. He said he had lied. He said Daniel had told him everything, the meeting, the diner, the code. He had known the whole time. He had helped Daniel plan it. He had been the backup, the safety net, the one who would call the police if things went wrong. But things had gone wrong before he could call, and now he was sorry, so sorry he could barely breathe. I took the envelope and asked him what was wrong. He looked over his shoulder, then back at me, then stepped aside. And there, standing behind him in the motel hallway, was the gray-haired man. Rafe, I would learn his name later, though he didn't deserve a name, didn't deserve to be remembered. He looked worse than I had left him. His face was bruised, swollen, purple in the dim light. His coat was torn, hanging off one shoulder. There was blood on his collar that might have been mine, or his, or the refrigerator's. But he was standing, and in his hand was a gun, a black semi-automatic that looked too heavy for him but wasn't. And pressed against his chest, held there by the refrigerator's massive arm, was a 10-year-old boy, Leo, Marcus's son, my nephew, the kid who loved dinosaurs and could not swim, and had asked me just last week if I believed in heaven, if Uncle Daniel was in heaven, if heaven had ice cream. He was crying silently, tears rolling down his face, mixing with the rain that still clung to his hair. He did not make a sound. He had learned not to make a sound.
Rafe smiled, the smile of a man who had won, who had cornered his prey, who was about to enjoy himself. He said the marathon never ended. Cute code, very sentimental, but all marathons ended, usually in death. He tilted the gun slightly, just enough to catch the light, just enough to remind me what it was. He told me to give him the card, or the boys' marathon would end tonight. I looked at Marcus, who was crying now too, who had failed his brother and his son in this same terrible moment. I looked at Leo, who was trying so hard to be brave, who was biting his lip to keep from screaming. I looked at the frozen image of Daniel on my laptop screen behind me, his face still wet with tears, his voice still echoing in my ears. Then I held up the micro SD card. I told him if he wanted it, he could come get it, and I put it in my mouth and swallowed. The room went very quiet. The rain stopped. The neon light stopped flickering. The refrigerator stopped cracking his knuckles. Everyone just stood there, frozen, waiting. Rafe's smile disappeared. For the first time, he looked confused, genuinely, deeply confused, like I had started speaking a language he did not understand, like I had done something no one had ever done before. He said I was insane. He said it with wonder, almost with respect. I said no, I was a widow with nothing to lose, and my husband had taught me one thing: backups. Always have backups. Always plan for the worst. Always assume they are smarter than you, and prepare accordingly. I tapped my chest, right over my heart. Under my shirt, taped to my skin, was a second micro SD card. I had made the copy at the motel 20 minutes before Marcus knocked. I did not know why. Call it instinct, call it paranoia, call it the ghost of Daniel whispering in my ear, call it love. I just knew I needed a second copy, a hidden copy, a copy they would never find. I told him one was for the grave and one was for the truth. If he killed me, my lawyer would release the second card at midnight. If he killed the boy, the same thing. If he killed anyone in this room, it would all go public. Every file, every email, every dead body, every name, every date, every secret. The whole world would know. The whole world would see. Rafe stared at me for a long, long time.
The refrigerator shifted his weight, uncomfortable now, uncertain. Leo whimpered, a small sound like a wounded animal. Marcus held his breath.
Then Rafe lowered the gun. He spoke into his earpiece, his voice flat and tired, stripped of all its earlier amusement. He said I was not the target. He said they would stand down and wait for the copy. He said they would find another way. He looked at me one last time. Something like respect flickered across his face, or maybe it was just exhaustion, just the weight of the job that had gone wrong. He said I was more like my husband than he expected. He said Daniel had been brave too. He said it hadn't saved him. Then he turned and walked down the motel hallway, the refrigerator shuffling behind him. Their footsteps faded. A door opened and closed. An engine started. And then they were gone. Leo ran to his mother. I collapsed against the doorframe. I sat on the floor of that motel room for a long time. The clock on the nightstand ticked. The rain started again, softer now. Marcus held Leo on the bed. The boy had stopped crying, but he would not let go of his mother's hand. Every few minutes he looked at me with eyes that asked questions I could not answer. Questions about evil and courage and why bad things happen to good people. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. The adrenaline had burned away everything except purpose, except clarity, except the simple knowledge of what I had to do. But first, I needed to make a call. I dialed the number Daniel had programmed into the burner phone, the only contact, labeled simply with the letter M, like a secret, like a code. It rang twice. Then a woman's voice answered, low, cautious, the voice of someone who had been expecting bad news for a very long time, someone who had been running for so long she had forgotten what standing still felt like. I told her my name was Elena Chen and that Daniel was my husband. She took a sharp breath, a sound like a knife cutting through fabric. Then there was silence, long and heavy. She said she was sorry, so sorry, that she had told Daniel to stop, that she had told him they would find out, that she had begged him to walk away. But he would not listen. He said the story was too important. He said people would die if he stopped. I told her he was right. The story was important, and I needed her help to finish it. She was quiet for a moment, thinking, weighing, deciding. Then she asked if I knew the code. I told her the marathon never ended. She said it never did, and that she would see me at the Owl Diner at 10. I looked at the clock on the nightstand. It was 9:52, 8 minutes. I stood up and walked to the door. Marcus grabbed my wrist, his fingers cold and desperate. He begged me not to go. He said they would kill me. He said I had seen what they did to Daniel, what they almost did to Leo. He said I was not a fighter, not a journalist, not prepared for this. He told me to just give them the card and walk away, to save himself, to live. I gently pulled my hand free. I said they had already killed Daniel. I was not walking away. I was running toward. I was finishing what he started. I looked at Leo. He was watching me with those big, scared eyes that had seen too much for a 10-year-old. I asked him what his favorite dinosaur was. He whispered T-Rex. I asked why. He said because they do not give up.
I smiled and told him that was right. They do not give up, and neither would we. Neither would I. I opened the door. Behind me, Daniel's phone, the one from the cemetery, the one that had started all of this, buzzed one last time. I did not answer it. I already knew everything I needed to know. I already had everything I needed. I walked out into the rain. The Owl Diner sat on the corner of Maple and Fifth, a silver Airstream trailer from the 1950s that had been converted into a restaurant sometime before I was born. The neon sign flickered, owl in pink, diner in blue, and the windows were fogged with the steam of coffee and the breath of late-night customers. It was the kind of place where people went to forget their problems, not to solve them. I parked across the street and watched for 10 minutes. No black SUVs, no men in expensive coats, no gray-haired ghosts, just rain and streetlights and the distant sound of a train, mournful and lonely. I got out of the car and walked inside. The diner was nearly empty. A cook in a stained apron flipped burgers on a flat-top grill, the grease sizzling and popping. A waitress with tired eyes and tired feet wiped down the counter, moving in slow circles like she had been doing this for 40 years and would be doing it for 40 more. In the back booth, sitting alone with a cup of coffee and a folded newspaper, was a woman in her early 40s. She had dark skin, close-cropped hair, and the kind of face that had seen too much and forgotten too little, the kind of face that belonged on a wanted poster or a memorial. I slid into the booth across from her and asked if she was Miriam Soto. She lowered the newspaper and studied my face for a long moment, searching for something, measuring me. Then she nodded.
She said I looked like him. Not in the face, in the eyes. She said I had that look too, the look of someone who has already decided they are not going to survive the story, the look of someone who has made peace with their own death. I told her I was not planning on dying. She said neither was he. Neither was he. Miriam reached into her purse and pulled out a thick folder, the kind lawyers use for important documents, the kind that holds lives and deaths and everything in between. She slid it across the table, and it landed with a soft thud. She said this was everything: the original data, the emails, the autopsy reports from the 7 victims they tried to bury, the 7 families they tried to silence. The internal memos where Vantage executives joked about acceptable losses, about the cost of doing business, about the price of a human life. She tapped the folder with one finger, a slow, deliberate tap. She said there were 4 names in there. 4 men who decided that killing people was cheaper than telling the truth, that lying was easier than fixing the problem, that profit mattered more than people. One was the CEO, a man with 3 homes and a yacht and a smile for the cameras. One was the head of clinical trials, a doctor who had sworn an oath and broken it. One was a former FBI agent who ran their security division, a man who had once protected the innocent and now protected the guilty. And one, she paused, her finger hovering over the folder, was a United States senator. I stared at her. A senator, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. She said Senator William Vantage. The company was named after his grandfather, a man who had made a fortune in pharmaceuticals and left a legacy of blood. He had been protecting them for 20 years, using his power to bury investigations, to intimidate witnesses, to keep the truth from seeing the light. He was the reason no one had ever been prosecuted. He was the reason Daniel was dead. I opened the folder, page after page of evidence, names, dates, locations, bank accounts, offshore holdings, encrypted messages, everything Daniel had died for, everything he had bled for, everything he had sacrificed for. I asked her where I needed to take it. She smiled, a thin, bitter smile, the smile of someone who has been fighting for so long she has forgotten how to do anything else. She said I did not take it anywhere. She did. She had a contact at the Washington Post, a woman who had been waiting for this for months, a woman who was not afraid of Vantage, who was not afraid of senators, who was not afraid of anything. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was warm, surprising. She said I needed to disappear. Tonight, right now. She said they would come for me, for Marcus and Leo, for everyone I had ever spoken to, for everyone Daniel had ever loved. I needed to go somewhere they could not find me, somewhere with no address, no phone, no trail. I told her I did not run. She said Daniel did not either, and look where it got him. Look where it got all of us. We sat there in silence for a long moment. The cook flipped a burger. The waitress poured a cup of coffee. The rain kept falling outside, relentless and patient, washing the world clean. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the second micro SD card, the one taped to my chest, the one they did not know about, the one that would change everything. I placed it on top of the folder and told her to take it, all of it, and to tell her contact at the Post to publish everything. No redactions, no delays, no fear. Everything. Miriam tucked the card and the folder into her bag. Then she stood up. She thanked me for finishing what Daniel started. She said he would be proud. She said he was probably watching, wherever he was, and he was smiling. I told her he started it. I just carried it across the finish line. I just ran the last mile. Miriam walked out of the diner. The bell above the door chimed once, a bright, cheerful sound that felt wrong in that moment. Then she was gone, swallowed by the rain and the night, disappeared like a ghost. I sat alone in the booth for a long time. Then I ordered a cup of coffee, black,
the way Daniel liked it, the way I had learned to like it after 12 years of watching him drink it, and drink it slowly, savoring the bitterness. The article ran 3 days later. It was front page news, then cable news, then international news. It spread across the world like fire, like a truth that could not be contained. Within a week, Vantage Biomedical had frozen all operations. Within a month, the CEO had resigned in disgrace. Within 2 months, the FBI had opened a criminal investigation that would reach further than anyone expected. Senator William Vantage was indicted on 17 counts of fraud, bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder. He pleaded not guilty, of course. His trial lasted 6 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. He is serving life in a federal prison. He will be eligible for parole when he is 112 years old. He will die there. The other 3 names on Miriam's list are in prison too. The former FBI agent got the longest sentence, 40 years. He will be an old man when he gets out, if he gets out. The head of clinical trials took a plea deal and testified against the others. He will be out in 15 years, assuming he survives that long, assuming someone does not find him first. The CEO is in a minimum security facility, playing tennis and writing his memoirs. Justice is not always fair, but it is better than nothing. The Washington Post won a Pulitzer for the story. Miriam Soto accepted it on behalf of the anonymous source who provided the evidence. She did not mention my name. She did not mention Daniel's either, but she wore a pair of red running shoes to the ceremony. I watched it on TV from a small apartment in a city where no one knew my name, where I had no past and no future, where I was just another face in the crowd. Marcus and Leo moved to Oregon. They call me every Sunday. Leo is 11 now. His favorite dinosaur is still the T-Rex. He is learning to swim. He is learning to be brave. He asked me once if Uncle Daniel was a hero. I told him yes. I told him Uncle Daniel was the bravest person I ever knew. I told him Uncle Daniel saved thousands of lives, and he did it because he believed that the truth mattered, that people mattered, that love mattered. Leo nodded and said he wanted to be brave like that someday. I told him he already was. And me? I sit on my porch most evenings. I drink coffee black. I watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red and gold. I think about Daniel. I think about the way he laughed, loud and unself-conscious, the kind of laugh that made everyone in the room smile. I think about the way he smelled, leather and sandalwood and coffee, always coffee. I think about the way he looked at me, like I was the only person in the room, even when the room was full of people. Like I was the most important thing in his world, like he could not believe his luck. I think about the last video he ever sent me. He said the last 12 years were the story, and everything else was just noise. He was wrong about one thing. He told me not to come looking for him. He told me to stay safe. He told me to live. But I found him anyway. Not in a casket, not in a graveyard, not in a motel room, or a diner, or a parking garage. I found him in the truth he died to tell. I found him in the thousands of lives he saved. I found him in every person who took Vantage off their shelf and threw it in the trash because of what he uncovered. I found him in the rain, and the coffee, and the red running shoes that still sit in the back of my closet. The marathon never ended. Neither did he. Neither will I. Some nights, when the rain is falling and the world is quiet, I swear I can hear his phone ringing. Not the one from the cemetery. That one died weeks ago. Battery finally giving out after one last buzz. A different phone. A phone I cannot see, cannot find, cannot answer. It rings and rings, and I know it is him, and I know he is trying to tell me something, and I know I will never hear what it is, but I do not need to hear it. I already know. He loved me. He loved me from the first moment to the last. And love, I have learned, is the only thing that outruns death. Love is the only marathon that never ends. I finish my coffee. I set the mug down. I watch the sun sink below the horizon, and I wait for tomorrow, because tomorrow is another day to tell his story, another day to keep his memory alive, another day to run. The marathon never ended, and neither will I.